Hey everyone, I'm Ben. Welcome to ZoomInfo's LinkedIn Live. I head up ZI Labs and go-to-market innovation at ZoomInfo, and I'm here with Millie Beetham, the director of ZI Labs and go-to-market innovation. Exciting topic to discuss today. We're going to talk about the power of generative AI in your go-to-market.
So, first thing, Ben, I wanted to share some insight before we got started that I thought was super interesting. I was reading McKinsey's recent generative AI study this week. I think it just came out last week, so it's super new. If you haven't read it, we'll make sure to go ahead and drop that in the chat for you all. But what I wanted to share is that when we first got asked to do this live on the topic, my brain immediately went to, well, let's talk about the value of all the increased productivity of your go to market teams. The McKinsey article actually points out there's two lenses through which to evaluate the potential impact of Gen AI. And so that first lens is the total economic potential of the new use cases the Gen AI will uncover. And the second is the added labor productivity potential. So they point out that it's not just one, but it's two forces that are really driving here. And that's why the potential of Gen AI is really so interesting. I just thought that was really unique insight. And we're actually going to demo some go to market use cases today, like I mentioned. And as we go through, I want to invite you all to think about the economic impact of these from both lenses. So, for example, like when I think about personalized emails, this use case drives more sales because the content overall will be more effective, but it also cuts down the time it takes to create that content for the practitioner. So if I'm a company, right, that's like double the money signs in my eyes.
Totally.
Um,
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. And I think, let's get into it, right? Like, what are some of those use cases? I think for a lot of the hobbyists or people who started to use generative AI in sort of like a consumer way, the most obvious thing is really around like content creation, plain text content creation. Obviously, people are getting into with Midjourney and others, image creation and video creation. All of that is here and it's here to stay. And I think when I think about it from a go-to-market lens, that's probably going to be the first place that people will innovate. And some of the first use cases that we'll show today are really around like the sort of content layer. But I'd encourage companies to sort of think about their go-to-market strategy in three layers. There's sort of like the engagement layer, which is really like content, ads, email copy, like how you engage with customers in different channels. There's the orchestration layer, sort of in the middle, which is like the instructions for your plays or recipes. How do you think about routing and assignment and timing of how do you orchestrate and bring all this together? And then there's the data layer at the bottom, right? Like how do you access raw data around companies, people, technographics, signals, et cetera? And our sense, at ZoomInfo is that the generative AI use cases will probably go in that order, like engagement, content layer first, orchestration layer second, and data layer third. And all three of them have a ton of generative AI use cases. So if we sort of take it literally, generative AI is around sort of creating something new from something that doesn't exist before. And that's going to be most obvious at the content layer. Take this email and summarize it for me. Write this email for me. Take this earnings transcript. Tell me what's actually happening here. Take this call transcript and tell me what the next steps are. Great. Makes sense. There's also going to be a ton of use cases around, hey, help me create a sequence with the right touch cadence and the right timing and orchestration based on the previous performance of my sequences. That's not very far away. And I think the next layer down is like the data layer has basically been locked in to just super technical people to get access to complex queries, find patterns, etc. All of that is coming for non-technical folks first. Like if you go into ChatGPT today and tell it to build you a SQL query for a particular set of parameters, like it will do that for you. And so it's going to quickly move down the stack. A lot of what we'll talk about today is going to be really that first layer around engagement layer, content layer.
Yeah, totally, Ben. And I think it's important for us to also mention, right? It is still about, even as we talk about AI and we like weave that into the conversation, it's still about timing, targeting, and content, right? In that order. But it is like super exciting to finally think that like delivering the right message to the right person at the right time at scale is finally within reach, right? We've gotten really good at right time thanks to like intent signals, and we're pretty good at the right person, but doing that at scale and then getting to the right message at scale, like that's like still been it's still a pipe dream for most companies out there.
Totally. And I think one of the things we should point out is that often companies are going to go headlong into this, like the existing data infrastructure they have. It's very clear that generative AI cannot work and cannot work well unless the underlying data is highly accurate. Like if you layer on Gen AI on top of bad data, it's basically going to get you to bad results real fast, right? Like it'll be an accelerant to badness. And so, it's critical that the underlying data layer that you're building on top of is accurate, it's maintained, it's sort of, normalized and cleaned up specific to your market. And data quality has to be the highest priority because Gen AI doesn't know necessarily what data is right and wrong, especially if it's being fed a model from a third party like your company. So I just want to note that, sort of, if you don't have your data house in order, don't try to think that you can scale this with Gen AI. That is the foundational element that's required for an effective AI strategy in your go to market.
Yeah, absolutely. Honestly, Ben, I don't think we can say that enough. I feel like it will, as we continue to talk about this, every single time that's going to come up. Um, but so Ben, why don't you go ahead and share some of the like messaging tools and some of the use cases? Why don't we get into the demo?
Let's do it. And I'd love your comments throughout. As Millie said at the beginning, this is a bit of a high wire act, right? Everyone knows that this is early days with AI, and I am not an engineer. So it is quite possible that there will be, any number of things that go wrong during this. So can everyone see my screen, Millie? Can you see the go-to-market plays site?
Sure can, yeah.
Okay, excellent. So stop me anytime if I'm screwing up the screen share. So a lot of folks have probably seen that we've done a bunch of work to open source our go-to-market plays effort. So a lot of these plays are sort of horizontally applicable ideas that any company can run, right? Operationalizing intent signals or when a contact moves. And we have many, many dozens of these plays. One of the first places that we looked at for AI was basically feeding these scenarios to AI and saying, hey, what would you write if you knew the specific thing happening within this company, right? Someone is surging on a particular intent signal, et cetera. And you knew that these are the actions that we wanted to take. And we fed it a specific person at a specific company and basically said, with this premise, show us like what you would write. So we've actually published a GPT example for every one of these many dozens of plays. And what we realized was that the content quality was so high out of the box that, this was really going to be something that could scale, right? And so you see that every one of these weaves in, specifics about Amazon, specifics about the persona, and specifics about the scenario. So this is just an example of just like published data or, the published example for each one of these plays, but every company has a version of this, right? Like if you tell AI enough about the scenario and the company and the person, you're going to get something really good that is probably about equal or possibly better than what some of the folks who are sending that today, are doing. So one thing that we did is we just tried to sort of democratize this for the entire org. So this is, just a demo. A lot of this happens through APIs on our back end. But I want to show an example of sort of like a stylized version of like, you have a company, you have a specific person in mind, you maybe know which tech ZoomInfo directly integrates with. And then we fed it all of this unique data around like, here's the play, here's the contact's name, here's the channels, a whole bunch of metadata around how these come together. And we actually wired up the OpenAI API to basically say, I want to just have this spit out an email to each one of these companies. And so it's basically making a call to and I just closed the window, of course, is basically making a call to ChatGPT to say, okay, go out there and write an email to DocuSign, write an email to ADP, write an email to FedEx, and weave in all of this foundational data, like what their integrations are, what their role is, what their title is. And so, obviously this is going to happen at scale and in product, and I'll show you that in a second. But we also want to make it available to anyone at our org who can bring in structured data and say, based on these 20, 30, 50 parameters, what would GPT write? So it's a really exciting example of like pulling together something really quick that leverages the power of this and can weave in all that foundational data as well. And so, another area that we're seeing this work really well. So often we're helping companies to think about dynamic content. So how do they take their data layer and have it sort of inform what their snippet strategy would be at scale. So as an example, a lot of companies are building out the infrastructure to have industry specific pivots, persona specific pivots, persona specific calls to action. And you can wire these up in your outbound tool to actually happen at scale to say, okay, if we know the vertical, then we know which reference customers to talk about. Let's do that out of the box. So as an example, and again, of course, we're doing this on a back end and a different than a spreadsheet. You can pull in a lot of these plugins where I actually have just entered my API key into this plugin, and I can basically go into any cell and say, okay, in this cell, let's reference X column and Y column, and basically run a query live that basically generates the content. So I can say, based on data that we've fed you, build a persona specific call to action for a product executive, and then have that scale across all the different personas. So we're able to basically use ChatGPT to generate all this content. Of course, we're upgrading it, massaging it, making it better. But then we're able to weave that into a tool to basically do a lot of this at scale. And so a lot of you are probably thinking like, okay, well, show me how this is going to work in your product. So we'll do that. We'll do that next. In Sales OS, for hopefully a lot of you watching here have access to this today, I can go in there and find a specific person. So I'll find Millie. She seems like someone I might want to reach out to today. And so I can go ahead and pull Millie up. And if I click this email button, I can basically go in and say, write Millie Beetham an email. And here are the specific parameters that I want to talk about. Talk about how we integrate with Salesforce and HubSpot, and ask an open-ended question around how we're going to meet up in Portland. So I'll click create. It's going to go out and basically make a call to the API and take all of this information and then weave together a personalized message that I can then insert into this, this email applet and press send. So again, it's basically doing exactly what a human would do when they look at, for example, what technology they're integrated with, where she's based, et cetera, and go ahead and build content around that. I can then insert that in here and press send right out of the box. And so, this is going to get even more sophisticated over time, but just want to call out that a lot of these content creation use cases are just so obvious as a place to start if you're not already doing this.
Hey, Ben, what about for like some of the marketers maybe in the audience? What about content creation outside of email messaging, right? Is there something we can show them around maybe ads or ad CTAs, et cetera?
Totally. Yeah, I'm glad you asked. So let me share screens again. I'm going to go back to my handy tab here. So one of the things that we also looked at as an opportunity, and it's just a really like sort of text rich environment to do it, is we took down a bunch of ads from some of the biggest companies in the world, right? You can see a lot of these ads are from, big companies in tech of all types. And we have both, pictures of all of their ads, of examples of all the different ads. And then we actually pulled out the CTA text for all of these. So we can basically take this CTA text and learn really interesting things about it. So in this particular prompt, what I've done is I've dumped in the text to say, I'm going to paste a bunch of calls to action, summarize this in a table with counts for the number of question marks, exclamation marks, total words, calls to action. You could have it be whatever you want. And so if I go ahead and I press edit and resubmit this, it's going to go out and basically look at all these calls to action and create a table that helps me understand, like, what are the tone of some of these ads? How many people are asking a question mark? Is it an excited tone? Like, what is the grade that we would give it? And so, we pulled down the ads for all of our enterprise and strat customers, and it made it so we can actually go out to them and say, hey, we did an analysis of your ads versus all the other ads for your competitors. And we have some specific ideas for how you can make these better. And we can basically do that at scale. And so this is just one example, right? I mean, it could work for SEO keywords. It could work for, blog post content, feeding content from a particular site, earnings transcripts. I mean, there's so many examples, but just being able to leverage the technology to basically clean up the data and shortcut. Hey, let me just look at the folks who got a B or above in the grade and just look at the folks whose tone was positive or neutral or what have you. So again, just an example, but there are probably thousands of these for marketers of how to think about leveraging this data in their go-to-market.
Oh, Ben, my years in digital marketing, if only I'd had this tool, I think I would have spent a lot more time outside and less time in front of my computer. I think, as I look at all of these, I know we're using a lot of these sort of in our day to day, but just gets me super excited for like what we haven't uncovered yet. Um, moving along, I think we've covered sort of the personalized messaging use cases, and I was thinking maybe we could like follow the revenue funnel as a thread. So let's say you like send those emails out, or you launch those ad campaigns, and you get the meeting from your inbound or your outbound channels, and you complete that meeting, right? I'm thinking about how Gen AI can really plug right in like right after that meeting. I know, we've recently released some recorded meeting summaries, and I was hoping maybe you could show and tell that a bit for the audience as well.
Yeah, I'd love to. I mean, this has been such a breakthrough for me in terms of like it was one of those use cases you thought it would happen, right? As soon as you sort of had this come out, you were like, wow, like it's going to be able to take large blocks of text and like summarize it for me, right? I did not think it would be as accurate and as helpful of truly giving me time back in the day. So I'll show an example of how this works at ZoomInfo today. So we have these call coaching summaries that come out of Chorus every time. So when I'm done with the call, it basically takes the transcript and it comes up with all the action items of what are we actually doing next, right? So obviously things like very specific things related to CRM. We have a recapped summary of the homework while someone's out. We discuss the needs for automation in HubSpot, right? A lot of these details. It even gives you these really nice personal touches, right? Of like, I was able to, on the back of this call, set up a time delayed message to follow up with the person about their trip to Zion, just because I was able to glean this insight from the call, even though I wasn't actually on this call. And so that was one of the biggest breakthroughs that we had, was just like, I used to spend probably an hour or two a day just going back and reviewing the tape from calls to see what happened. And we already had summaries, but this made it so it just really pulled it into one place and gave me an actionable set of next steps. So I rarely will listen to entire calls now. I might listen to particular snippets, but I'm able to see what happened on every call that I was not able to attend. So this has probably been like one of the biggest unlocks, and it was super fast to go from trying to develop this to getting it in market. We're taking that a lot farther at ZoomInfo. So a lot of the ways that we used to do call coaching was, we would take the performance of a given rep, we would look at reps in any particular segment, and a lot of the summaries were around more generic insights around like, hey, this is where you fall versus your peers, etc. Now we're actually able to get to a place where we're recommending things like specific packages that they should be talking about. So we've sort of fed it enough data where it really understands a lot about ZoomInfo, the way our pricing and packaging works, and the way that we can actually inform call coaching at scale. So now all of our reps are basically able to get real insights on not just how they can do better sort of qualitatively, but like, here's exactly what you should be talking about with this flavor of customer. So when we look at the structured data around that, we're basically able to isolate, things like win rate, expected value, ACV, discount rates, et cetera, and then boil that down to an AI recommendation of like, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Rep, here's exactly what you should do next. And so it's exactly what the humans were doing earlier after spending, however many minutes or hours combing through this data, piecing together insights and getting to the so what of here's what the rep should do next. Now that just works out of the box. So if you have Chorus, you already know that these Chorus summaries are coming to your inbox. But you can easily go in and take the transcript, download it, and dump it in and ask it other questions, right? So if I was to download this transcript and pull this up, I could basically grab this entire thing, put it into ChatGPT, and say, hey, what could I do better next time to drive the sale? Or ask, really specific questions that maybe you didn't get out of your call summary. So as I press save and submit, it's going to comb through the entire 31 minutes of the call and basically say, hey, you didn't take enough control of the conversation. Like, you didn't clearly communicate the purpose. Be prepared with relevant information. Actively listening, close the call with a clear call to action. I mean, this is like exactly what you would want to know from your manager if you were, sort of new and trying to learn about how you can do better. So, showed examples of like call summaries of just sort of tactical next steps. We showed examples of sort of analysis of how our reps are doing on calls and what they can do better. And then an obvious extension of this is looking at things like earnings transcripts. So this is an example of us taking a ticker symbol, maybe our earnings call or Pure Storage's earnings call, and doing the summary. So if you're an account manager and you have a book of business, right, every 3 months, if you have public companies, they're coming out with an earnings call where the CEO and CFO are telling you about their priorities. They're telling you about what's happening in the company. And some of these are pretty detailed, right? So this is like ZoomInfo's last public earnings transcript. I can basically take this, paste this into ChatGPT, and have it summarize, here's how I can sell to ZoomInfo going forward. And it basically pulls out all the nuggets and summarizes for you how to think about what's actually happening within this business. So if you're an account manager or you're, covering a book of business today and you're not using AI to summarize earnings transcripts to figure out how to sell more to them, you're just leaving money on the table. It's right there for the taking.
Oh my gosh. It's just unbelievable to see all of that back to back. I feel like when you use it at like different parts of your day to day, you're like, oh yeah, it's really cool and very useful here. And then to see them all together, like I think about the like added productivity, like every single day you and I are getting out of this. Like the meeting summaries specifically, like as a leader, have just changed my life. I spend so much less time having to watch calls and then review those and summarize them myself. Instead, I can get through 30 right in an afternoon. It's going to be so great to watch people sort of like add these to their workflows. And I would encourage folks that are in the audience right now, like tell us, like if you start to put these into practice, like come share like your experience, what went well, what didn't go well, what else you found out. I want to vision cast a little bit. We've gone through some of the live use cases. But as let's follow that thread of moving from completed meeting and closing that business. The next step is really thinking about evaluating why you won or why you lost. And either that's the performance of your go-to-market campaign, or maybe you need to make changes now to how your territories are mapped, or you need to reevaluate your pricing structure. Ben talked a little bit about pricing packaging details that we're sort of feeding in to the Gen AI tools. Today, right, like some of the hardest exercises for go-to-market teams are to go through, to take those data-driven findings, to use them to tweak targeting, territory, pricing models. I think about like my other folks, on ABM teams, getting picking your target accounts today, right, Ben? Like making those audiences dynamic over time. That's really hard to do. Modeling your ICP and then remodeling it over and over again. It's like such a time suck. And with Gen AI, like the future of that is you'll be able to refresh those audiences just as often as you want. If you're technical or non-technical, it doesn't matter, right? You can make tweaks, add criteria, make structural changes to those ICPs, those target account lists so easily, and then be able to roll those out across your business in like no time. Another use case that I've been thinking so much about, and this is, really from my own experience, because this is the world I live in every day. If you rebalance your reps account loads every quarter or every half, you recut your territories, you'll just be able to describe those additional changes that you want to make to that model. Instead of having to process all the data and recalibrate the model, like describe what other criteria you want to bring in, use your accurate data layer that we talked about underneath to power that. And then you just let the Gen AI run the refresh. Obviously I'm giving you all a little taste of maybe like what your future might look like, hopefully to help you ideate on things, maybe places where you can start to plug this in. But be on the lookout for this in tools like ZoomInfo, in other, revenue intelligence tools that you might be using. But Ben, what are your thoughts on here? Recommendations for folks, what they should be on the lookout for when it comes to sort of go to market and Gen AI driving their workflow?
Yeah, no, I love the vision that you're laying out. I think that's exactly where we're headed. I'd say I have a few thoughts here, but there's a few comments that came in. I want to get to those in the chat. We have one that was asking, someone was asking, how do they get enabled and get on the right learning track for this?
Mm-hmm.
I don't have like an amazing take or some masterclass that Millie and I are ready to announce around GPT and GTM. But what I would say is there are a huge number of people putting out great content on this. Like if you just start in TikTok, following and commenting on some of the, sort of go-to-market focused tips in AI, your algorithm will quickly start showing you a lot more of this content. So I'd say, don't be afraid to go on social and go digging for people who are constantly putting out tips and tricks. A lot of it comes back to plugins and extensions and things that you can quickly add to your workflow of like do exactly what you're doing before, but just do it a lot faster with GPT. So that's the first thing, is like taking a lot of content on this, add all these free extensions that everyone's using. We had another question that came in that asked about what about the privacy of putting call transcripts into GPT or Gen AI. I think is a really good question. First and foremost, talk to your management team, your privacy folks, lawyers, et cetera, on what the stance is per company. I'm not a lawyer and I won't give you advice on how to run your company. But what I will say is, my personal take is companies should err more on the side of leveraging this and learning from it, the same way that they would not be afraid to Google things that might be sensitive to get the right answers for their business. My sense is, yes, if you're using a low quality provider that's based in, certain countries, like I wouldn't want to put confidential information into that. I think that for something like OpenAI, it's going to be a lot like Google, where you sort of are making the assumption that they're going to protect your privacy. But if it's super confidential and it's like, proprietary, you know, data or intellectual property, like you have to make your own decisions. We personally on the go to market side are erring more towards like, this is something that's a platform shift and we're going to use it. But of course, being thoughtful around, you know, where that line is drawn. Millie, to your question around, how do people start thinking about it? I think you said it early on, getting your data in the right state first is probably step one, right? Like if you're going to be building a really high throughput go-to-market motion with with generative AI on top of bad data, it's basically going to be like bad results really, really fast, right? So it'll just sort of accelerate the badness if it's based on the wrong foundation.
Yeah.
I'd say, we laid out the construct earlier around sort of like content layer, orchestration layer, data layer. Start at the content layer. That's the most obvious place. Like a lot of the demos that we just showed or examples that we showed are things where it's just very simply a huge amount of written text that you can get to insights on faster. And I'd say like one tip is very similar to how, like, if you're trying to scale plays or go to market plays within your org, often the best reps are already running these go to market plays. It's about extracting sort of the decision tree that goes off in their head and backing it out for the entire org. It's the same thing with generative AI. Find the innovators in your org, find the people who are already thinking about this every day, ask them how they use it to make their job easier, and then try to say, okay, great, Mr. or Mrs. like very innovative rep, we're going to figure out how to make this available to all 1,000 of our reps or 500 of our reps, however many you have. So I would run workshops where you literally just ask people, like, what are the biggest breakthroughs you're having that you think could apply to the rest of the company? There's going to be tons of them. Everybody in your company, unless you've already blocked access to ChatGPT, is already doing this. So I would say, like, find the innovators, use it as a blueprint. And I'd say just start. Like, don't try to find the perfect use case. Try to figure out, where you can get these big leaps in productivity and, launch and iterate.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I feel like we're giving the audience like a nice like next step. If you're a people manager or even if you're an IC, like go suggest that your next team meeting is just about talking about, how you're using GPT or Gen AI in your workflows and where you wish you could be using it. Maybe you don't have access or don't know how to, right? Open up that conversation. That feels like just such an easy next step from this conversation. Big thanks to Laura and to Amy for some of those good questions coming in. But yeah, I mean, Ben, what else are we leaving the audience with today before we log off?
No, just super excited about this space, and I'd say that one key thing we want to highlight is there's a lot that ZoomInfo is working on from a product perspective that ZoomInfo customers will see start to appear throughout our product set. Nothing that we're planning on announcing today, but we're just extremely excited about this new platform shift and what it's going to provide in terms of value for our customers. I'm just pumped to have the opportunity to connect with folks, and Millie, for you and I to do this. So thanks everyone for joining in and your active participation. And we'll probably try to do another one of these soon.
Yeah. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Appreciate the time.